The end of March was unexpectedly warm for a city in the Urals. It was literally filled with an atmosphere of changing weather, adding bright colors and a sense of spring renewal to the metropolis. The city had just awakened under the morning rays of the sun, and the warm air was already filled with that special, unique scent of spring that had not yet fully awakened. Sunday, March 27, 2010 was for Firuz one of the dull days in a series of equally meaningless and hopeless days in his life. In this foreign, aggressive city, he was in deep conflict with the generally accepted norms and values. Firuz constantly felt an inner anxiety that had lived in him since the time he illegally arrived in this foreign country in January, and this grey, unfamiliar city after he had despaired of finding a job in his native Tajikistan. But what was he hoping for when he went to Russia, without a profession, without knowing the Russian language? Firuz Aytuganov went to a distant, unfamiliar city in search of new opportunities and a better life, since he was unable to realize himself in his homeland due to his low social status and lack of any professional skills. He was inspired to travel abroad by the boastful stories of his fellow countrymen who had managed to find high-paying jobs in Russia. His decision was spontaneous and urgent, and as soon as he arrived in Yekaterinburg, his optimism immediately faded and Firuz faced a number of difficulties. His knowledge of Russian was extremely limited, and this made it difficult for him to communicate properly with those around him. He experienced difficulties not only in everyday situations, such as buying groceries at the store or talking to local residents, but also in more serious circumstances, for example, when seeking help. His illegal status made him vulnerable to the law and limited his access to employment opportunities. When he became seriously ill during the unusually cold Ural winter, he couldn't count on help from doctors because of this, and he didn't end up in the cemetery, Beryozovskoye, where unclaimed people were buried, only thanks to the care of the landlady from whom he was lucky enough to rent a room. Illness and the inability to find even some kind of job led his life to financial ruin. Firuz couldn't even provide himself with the bare minimum. Failures in his job search only increased his sense of helplessness and despair. Naturally, he was rejected from many places where he applied for a job. In the end, he got a job as a parking lot security guard, thanks to the help of a fellow countryman he happened to meet at the train station. This was done illegally, without official documents. Even though Firuz found a job, his problems didn't go away. He struggled with money, housing repairs, and adjusting to life in the big city. Young man, Firuz was 21 years old. What worried him was that he owed a month's rent to the landlady of the apartment he was renting on the outskirts of Yekaterinburg. If he became homeless, he wouldn't survive. His mind feverishly searched for a way out. The poorly educated, not very bright young man could only think of solving his problems through crime. His instincts told him that it would be easier for him to commit violence against people from another country with his fellow countrymen. During this spring holiday, Firuz chose to focus on finding a victim. His practical mind and sense of self-preservation told the young man that he should choose someone who wouldn't be able to put up a decent fight. In the end, Firuz decided that he should find a suitable lonely woman or a teenager. He walked the streets of Yekaterinburg for 3 hours, but in practice carrying out his plan turned out to be not so easy. First of all, on Sunday there were very few lonely passers-by in the city, and those who seemed suitable to Firuz were in crowded places where it was impossible to carry out his plan. The young man decided to try his luck in the new development area, where the infrastructure was poorer and the chances of success for the upcoming operation were higher. He picked an unfinished, abandoned 9-story building 2 blocks from where he rented a room. It was a building that looked like a huge concrete box with empty window openings and no exterior finishing. Construction of the building had stopped at the stage of installing the middle floor. Firuz walked through the first floor and looked around. Other than bare walls, leftover building materials, and broken equipment, he found nothing. Only in one of the rooms did he find an old mattress. There was chaos all around the construction site. Trash, construction debris, and already growing vegetation left no doubt that the site was abandoned and not being used by anyone. The area was deserted with no people or construction equipment present. Firuz noticed that along the tall fence surrounding the abandoned construction site there was an asphalt pedestrian path leading to the neighborhood located on the hill. It was used by residents who arrived on bus number 33, but all the residents of the neighborhood were obviously well acquainted and usually walked in groups of 2 or 3 people. By evening, hungry and tired, Firuz Aytugan finally saw a suitable victim from his hiding place near the bus stop. A middle-aged woman with a handbag in her hand was walking alone along the path. Firuz's heart began to pound loudly. Excited, he put on his gloves and followed her. Seizing the moment, he grabbed her by the arms and dragged her into an abandoned house. The woman tried to resist and call for help, but Firuz struck her several times in the stomach, leaving her unable to fight back. He nearly dragged the woman into a first-floor room and threw her onto a filthy mattress. Aytuganov was overwhelmed with incredible excitement. He had never in his life experienced such pleasure from having unlimited power over another person. Firuz furiously tore the clothes off the girl, getting even more aroused at the sight of the victim's naked body. The woman was overwhelmed and hardly resisted, only sobbing loudly and frequently. After satisfying his lust, Aytuganov ordered her to be quiet. He was afraid that it might attract the attention of random passers-by on the street. But the woman kept sobbing, and then Firuz, in a fit of rage, grabbed her by the throat and started squeezing with his fingers. He soon realized the girl was dead. Aytuganov calmly searched the corpse, took the gold jewelry from the victim and took the money and phone. Before leaving, he looked out onto the street, where it was already dusk, and, making sure there were no witnesses, calmly went to the city center, where he had a good dinner at a restaurant, surprising the waiter with a large tip and his terrible knowledge of the Russian language. That same evening, Firuz paid the landlady, who had arrived with the firm intention of evicting the negligent tenant from the room if he didn't pay his debt. In the morning, the criminal calmly went to work. The homeless man nicknamed Baron knew at least 20 places in the city where one could safely spend the night or take a break from the difficult, hectic life. Baron led a nomadic lifestyle and wandered around the city here and there, and everywhere he had a hideout where he could stay. This time, with a huge dirty backpack on his shoulders, he headed to an unfinished 9-story building he knew, where he had already spent the night more than once. After sneaking into the abandoned building, he saw the familiar emptiness. Sand and debris, ruined by time and moisture, crunched underfoot. The air smelled of gloom and mold. But this time, it was different. A sharp premonition made the homeless man slow his steps and listen carefully. Nothing. He decided to explore all the rooms on the floor, realizing that anything could be in this abandoned place. Carefully retreating, he reached the corner of one of the rooms. Baron was seized by fear and horror when he saw the corpse of a woman around 30 lying on the mattress. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open, and her naked body and the blue tongue sticking out of her mouth clearly indicated that death had occurred from unnatural causes. The homeless man was overwhelmed by disgust and helplessness, making his already fragile, dangerous world feel even worse. Baron's heart started beating faster. When he realized he had to act, he knew he needed help and had to report it to the police. Law enforcement had just begun actively searching for the criminal who committed a serious crime at the abandoned construction site, while the guest from sunny Tajikistan was already planning a new misdeed. Impunity always breeds lawlessness, and Tuganov believed in his rising star in the dark and murky criminal sky. He began to see himself as a cool Hollywood character, standing above social norms and rules, confident in his own inviolability. Sweet thoughts were swarming in Aytuganov's head. He was no longer who he used to be. He was no longer just an ordinary person from the crowd, pushed around by everyone. Firuz became greater than life, and the world had to acknowledge his strength and greatness. Now Firuz Aytuganov is the main character of his own story, and no one can stop him. He believed rules and laws were for the weak and losers. He doesn't intend to obey them, because he's above all that. No rule or regulation applies to him. Now he's finally free, like a bird in the sky. Nothing can stop him. Firuz thought his actions had no consequences. He was surprised and delighted to find that he didn't feel a shred of guilt or fear of punishment. He controls life and death, and his will is law. With pride and satisfaction, Aituganov thought that soon he would be feared and respected in this city. Firuz knew that his reputation as a ruthless and merciless maniac would only strengthen his greatness. Perhaps he would soon become a true legend. One day, the world would have to know him and tremble for months. This was the kind of fame the Tajik loser now dreamed of. These thoughts inspired Firuz. After gaining his first experience of a successful attack, the young man decided that the priority in choosing a crime scene should be areas relatively far from large crowds and residential buildings. He also realized that operating at night was much safer than during the day. Firuz committed his second and third crimes by using his first crime as a model and making some additions to it. He stalked both young women in the dark in the Leninsky and Chkalovsky districts of the city. He assaulted the first woman. Death occurred due to asphyxiation. As a weapon, Firuz used her own bra. He did the same with the second victim, but to take her life, he used a belt. In both cases, he managed to take money and valuables. Only a week passed between the second and third murders. He felt invincible. He understood that he was living in Yekaterinburg without registration and working unofficially, which made the investigator's job more difficult. Because of this, he was harder to find. Like an artist seized by a creative impulse, Firuz was looking for a suitable place for his next attack. The southwestern forest park of Yekaterinburg is a narrow strip of pine forest on both sides of the bypass road. The popular name of the park? Figonsky Forest, although experts often compare it to the famous Central Park in New York. Firuz often walked here, considering this place convenient for his crimes. He was especially fond of the so-called Second Park, which was located near the intersection of Moskovskaya Street and the bypass road. It seemed less well maintained to him. No wonder the locals called it wild. Here, he accidentally discovered an abandoned concrete bunker left behind by the military 30 years ago. After that, Aituganov spent several days stalking lonely young women near this structure, rightly believing that the bunker was perfect for his intentions. Rumors of a maniac had already spread, making residents afraid to walk in the woods alone. The 28-year-old resident of Kamensk-Uralsky, Yulia Komarova, who had come to visit a friend, knew nothing about the bloody hobby of the modest Tajik security guard. On a warm spring evening, she took a shortcut through the green area to her friend's private house on Zelenaya Street. Aituganov had been following her since the bus stop. He acted like a true predator, carefully stalking his long-awaited prey. Then he caught up with the woman, struck her several times to prevent her from resisting, and dragged her away from the path, saying that if she resisted, he would use a weapon. Firuz led the frightened woman to a bunker deep in the forest. There he forced her to lie down on the dirty concrete floor, pulled her clothes over her face, took off her shoes and jeans, and assaulted her. At the last moment, Yulia realized that this maniac was not going to let her live. She made a desperate attempt to break free from the maniac's grasp. She almost succeeded. She struck Aituganov hard in the face with her elbow and, taking advantage of the element of surprise, managed to get up and run to the door of the underground shelter. But Firuz caught up with the woman and in a fit of rage, struck her several times on the head with a brick that was at hand. When attacking a person for the first time, Firuz wanted to solve his financial problems this way and planned to rob the victim. But when he experienced an incredible sense of complete satisfaction from abusing and taking the life of that woman at the abandoned construction site, a positive feeling of release and even bliss became fixed in his mind. Even then he realized that it wouldn't end with just one victim. Firuz had no doubt that now he would need to experience those feelings again and he would look for new victims. To take the lives of 4 people. Firuz didn't consider this to be immoral. On the contrary, for him it was an enjoyable pastime. He saw nothing wrong or unusual about it. He only noticed that with each crime the feeling of relief became less and less, and now one victim was no longer enough for his complete satisfaction. This addiction came as a surprise to Firuz himself, but now it had become the sole purpose of his life. Literally the next day, Aituganov began preparing for the next attack. Like a fisherman patiently waiting for a catch, he methodically searched for a victim where he was most likely to find a suitable candidate. He studied the situation in schoolyards, watched women of easy virtue in their gathering places, and combed through secluded alleys. Firuz realized he especially enjoyed the act of searching for a victim. Moreover, he learned how to instill a sense of safety in young girls, making them relax in his presence. Taking advantage of the fact that he looked quite a lot like Ricky Martin, a well-known Latin American singer at the time. If it weren't for his very poor Russian, which scared off potential victims, the Tajik maniac's fishing would have been much more effective. Firuz was also now aroused by the moment when the prey fell into his hands. The victim's sudden fear was a crucial part of the sadistic spectacle for the maniac, making the climax and finale possible. The constant abuse, when Tuganov experienced orgasm, was no longer the highest moment of pleasure for him. He experienced true ecstasy at the moment of the victim's agony when he took their life and they died from asphyxiation. Firuz was sure that no other way to take a life would give him such pleasure. That was the reason behind all his previous actions. The only thing Firuz regretted was that taking a life was still an intense but short-lived pleasure. To prolong pleasure and preserve memories, Tuganov also kept some victims' purses and cosmetics, along with valuables and expensive cell phones hidden in his rented apartment. But this time, luck turned away from Firuz. For the first time in 3 months, everything went off plan. When he assaulted his next victim, she broke free and escaped. The criminal was left with just her purse, containing an expensive cell phone and some money. Another girl who was attacked by the brazen maniac also left her phone in Firuz's hands and managed to escape. Both of these women remembered Firuz's face and filed a report with the police. At first, the door-to-door visits by officers in the areas where Firuz committed his crimes yielded no results. Even the victims' families didn't want to talk to them. Some doubted the maniac would be caught, while others feared getting involved and facing court later. People were told that the investigative team was created specifically to solve these brutal crimes, and gradually people started to cooperate. Now every lead was thoroughly investigated and each clue was entered into a special table, chart or list that was constantly updated and analyzed. A psychological profile of the criminal was created. After analyzing the geography of the crime scenes, the investigators suggested where the suspected maniac might live. The search area narrowed and the operation soon produced results. The detectives had a composite sketch of the suspect. All this time, Firuz was being searched for based on his distinct Asian appearance. Those were the only identifying features. In both cases, when the victim survived, the perpetrator had a black sports bag with a shoulder strap. The investigators also had DNA samples from the perpetrator, which were obtained from semen left on the victims' bodies. Back then, such a study cost around $10,000. Firuz and Tuganov were detained Friday evening, July 23, 2010. He rented a room in an old two-apartment house on the city outskirts, its walls covered in thick graffiti. The officers knocked and Firuz opened the door himself. He was dressed and there was a suitcase with his belongings by the door, as if the maniac was about to go on a trip. Or maybe his heightened intuition told him that the investigators were already on his trail. The room was abandoned and neglected. The wallpaper on the walls had long needed to be replaced. A dirty old carpet lay on the floor. In the corner stood a bed with a spring mattress, covered by a woolen blanket and a pillow without a pillowcase. There were empty beer bottles on the floor and on the windowsill. Next to the bed were a shabby table and a stool, a television on the wall opposite the bed, and a faded poster advertising a popular movie completed the room's interior. In another corner of the dwelling was a small kitchen area, from which the smell of something burnt was coming. Overall, the room looked like a temporary shelter for someone trying not to attract attention and hiding from the law. An anonymous hideout where a criminal could temporarily take cover and plan his next move. There was a sports bag on the coat rack by the entrance, and its appearance matched the operational description. Firuz was unable to present a passport or any other identification document when requested by the police, after which he was detained and taken to the station. He stayed silent with his head down, occasionally crying or rambling nonsense, mixing Russian and Tajik words. A psychiatrist from forensic examination had to work with the detainee, but their verdict stated that the maniac was sane and committed the crime with full awareness of his actions. Since he lived in Yekaterinburg with short breaks for 2 years, investigators made a fingerprint card for the maniac and sent it to the regions to check the Yekaterinburg maniac's involvement in similar crimes there. The court proved that Firuz and Tuganov, over the course of 3 months from March to July 2010, first assaulted and then took the lives of 4 people. 1 assault with an attempted murder and 2 robberies. During the investigation, 3 more cases of assault were considered, in which the women survived. The court found Firuz not guilty of these episodes due to a lack of witnesses or evidence. Why some of the victims did not identify Tuganov as the person who attacked them remains a mystery. The verdict was announced at a session of the Sverdlovsk Regional Court, which took place on July 11, 2011. Firuz and Tuganov were sentenced to the highest penalty, life imprisonment. In addition, the 22-year-old maniac was ordered to pay a fine of several million rubles to the relatives of the murdered women. To serve a life sentence, Tuganov was sent to the special regime colony Polar Owl.